I stared at the positive pregnancy test in my trembling hands, my heart racing with a mixture of joy and terror. 8 weeks. I was 8 weeks pregnant with Brandon's baby, and I couldn't wait to tell him. After 3 years of marriage, we were finally going to be a family. I hid the test in my purse and practically floated downstairs to the kitchen, where Brandon sat at our marble breakfast table, newspaper spread before him like a shield. The morning sunlight streamed through our floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in a golden glow that seemed perfect for sharing the most important news of our lives. "Good morning, honey," I said, my voice barely containing my excitement as I poured myself orange juice instead of my usual coffee. "I have something amazing to tell you." Brandon didn't look up from his paper. He was reading the business section, as always, his dark hair perfectly styled even at 7 in the morning. "Can it wait? I'm reading about the Sterling Industries merger. This could be huge for my career." My stomach fluttered with nervous energy. "Actually, it's about our future too. Something that will change everything for us." He finally glanced up, but his expression wasn't the loving look I'd hoped for. Instead, his blue eyes held an irritation that made my excitement falter. "Victoria, you know I love you, but let's be honest here." He folded his newspaper with sharp, precise movements. "You're just a placeholder until she says yes." The words hit me like ice water. "What?" Brandon reached for his coffee, completely casual, as if he hadn't just shattered my world. "Isabel Crawford, the CEO. I've been working on her for months now. She's finally starting to notice me, and when she's ready to settle down, well..." He shrugged. "You understand, right? You're sweet, Victoria, but you're not exactly CEO wife material." I felt the pregnancy test burning like a secret in my purse. The baby I'd been so excited to tell him about suddenly felt like a weight in my chest. "Brandon, we're married. We took vows. And I've been a good husband, haven't I?" He stood up, straightening his tie. "I've given you a beautiful home, a comfortable life. But let's not pretend this was ever about forever. You knew what this was when we started." No, I didn't know. I thought he loved me. I thought our quiet wedding 3 years ago meant something. I thought the way he held me at night, the way he laughed at my jokes, the way he said he wanted to build a life together. I thought it was real. "I have to go," Brandon said, checking his expensive watch. "Isabel called an emergency board meeting this morning. This could be it, Victoria. This could be when everything changes for me." He kissed my forehead like I was a child, and I stood frozen in our kitchen, one hand unconsciously moving to my still flat stomach. Everything changes for him. What about what was changing for us? After Brandon left, I sat alone at our breakfast table, staring at the newspaper he'd abandoned. The headline read, "Sterling Industries announces major restructuring." Below it was a photo of Isabel Crawford, her sharp features and calculating smile filling half the page. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Brandon's recent calls. There it was, Isabel's number, called 17 times in the past week. Late-night calls, early morning calls. Calls while I was sleeping, thinking my husband was working late for our future. The pregnancy test felt heavy in my purse. Our baby, his baby, would grow up knowing their father saw their mother as disposable. A placeholder. Something temporary until something better came along. I walked to our home office and opened Brandon's laptop. His email was still logged in, and there they were. Dozens of messages between him and Isabel. Professional at first, then flirtatious, then planning. Planning a future that didn't include me. My hands shook as I closed the laptop. Brandon had no idea who I really was. He had no idea that the simple housewife he was so eager to discard was actually Victoria Sterling, granddaughter of Theodore Sterling. the man who built Sterling Industries from nothing. I touched my stomach again, thinking of the tiny life growing inside me. A life that deserved better than a father who saw love as a business transaction. It was time for Brandon to learn exactly who held the real power in this relationship. I sat in the back row of the Sterling Industries boardroom, my hands folded carefully in my lap to hide their trembling. The morning sickness had been brutal, but I'd forced myself to come. Brandon had mentioned I could attend as his guest, a throwaway comment he'd made weeks ago, never imagining his housewife would actually show up to a corporate meeting. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered from my childhood visits with Grandfather Theodore. Mahogany panels lined the walls, and the massive conference table could seat 30 people. Today, it was packed with executives, department heads, and board members, all buzzing with nervous energy about Isabel's mysterious emergency meeting. Brandon sat near the front, his posture confident and eager. He'd worn his best suit, the navy one I'd helped him pick out for our anniversary dinner last year. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was dressed for what he thought would be the most important day of his career, having no idea it would actually be the day his world collapsed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Isabel Crawford's voice cut through the chatter like a blade. She stood at the head of the table, commanding the room with her presence. At 36, she was everything Brandon apparently wanted: powerful, ruthless, and completely focused on success. Her red hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her black suit probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Isabel continued, her green eyes scanning the room. They lingered on Brandon for just a moment longer than professional courtesy required. "Today marks a turning point for Sterling Industries." I pressed my hand against my stomach, feeling queasy for reasons that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones. Something was building in this room, something that would change everything. "As you know, we've been exploring expansion opportunities in the European market," Isabel said, clicking to the first slide of her presentation. "I'm pleased to announce that we've secured the Henderson Group merger, which will increase our market share by 40%. Applause filled the room. Brandon was practically glowing with excitement, probably calculating how this success would reflect on his marketing department. He had no idea that I'd been the one to approve that merger through my hidden trust, using a shell company to mask my involvement. "This success," Isabel continued, "has made me realize something important about leadership, about partnership, and about the future of this company." She clicked to the next slide, but instead of financial projections, it showed a single word: partnership. "Building an empire requires more than just business acumen," Isabel said, her voice taking on a softer tone that made my skin crawl. "It requires having the right person by your side, someone who understands ambition, who shares your vision, who can stand as an equal in both the boardroom and in life." My heart started pounding. This wasn't going where I thought it was going. This couldn't be happening. Isabel stepped away from the podium and walked directly toward Brandon's seat. The entire room fell silent, sensing something momentous was about to occur. Brandon looked confused but pleased by the attention. "Brandon Hayes," Isabel said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent boardroom. "For months, I've watched you work. I've seen your dedication, your intelligence, your drive to succeed. You understand what it takes to build something lasting." Brandon stood up slowly, his face flushed with what I realized was anticipation, not surprise. He knew. Somehow he knew what was coming. "You've shown me that true partnership isn't just about business," Isabel continued. And then, to my absolute horror, she dropped to one knee right there in front of the entire board of directors. "It's about finding someone who shares your vision for the future." She pulled out a small velvet box, and the room erupted in gasps and whispers. I felt like I was watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. Brandon Hayes, will you marry me? The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the baby's presence like a secret burning inside me. My husband, was being proposed to by another woman in front of 30 witnesses. Brandon's face broke into the biggest smile I'd ever seen him wear. Bigger than on our wedding day. Bigger than when he'd gotten his promotion. Bigger than any smile he'd ever given me. Yes, he said, his voice strong and clear. Absolutely, yes. The room exploded in applause as Isabel slipped an enormous diamond ring onto Brandon's finger. He pulled her up and kissed her passionately, right there in front of everyone, including his wife sitting in the back row. I want everyone to know, Brandon announced, his arm around Isabel's waist, that I've finally found someone worthy of building a future with, someone who understands what real success looks like. He looked directly at me then, his eyes cold and dismissive. Don't worry about the complications, he said to Isabel, loud enough for everyone to hear. I'll handle the divorce quickly. Some things are just temporary arrangements that have outlived their usefulness. The applause continued, but I barely heard it over the roaring in my ears. Temporary arrangements. That's what our marriage was to him. That's what our baby would be. I stood up quietly, my purse clutched tightly in my hands, the pregnancy test still hidden inside like evidence of a crime. Several people glanced at me curiously, but no one really knew who I was. Just Brandon's quiet little wife, leaving early because she probably didn't understand the business implications of what she'd just witnessed. Excuse me, I whispered to no one in particular. I need to get some air. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Isabel's voice behind me. This merger isn't just about business, everyone. It's about creating a dynasty that will last for generations. I paused at the door, my hand on the handle, and turned back one last time. Brandon was beaming, accepting congratulations from colleagues who had no idea they were celebrating the destruction of his marriage and the abandonment of his unborn child. He had no idea that the dynasty Isabel wanted to build was already mine, and he was about to lose everything. 25 years ago, my grandfather Theodore Sterling sat in his study, dying of cancer, and made a decision that would change everything. I was only 4 years old then, playing with my dolls on his Persian rug while he worked on what I now know were the most important legal documents of his life. Victoria, my little princess, he'd said in his gravelly voice, setting down his pen to watch me. Someday, all of this will be yours. But you must promise me something. You must earn it, not inherit it. I didn't understand what he meant then. I was too busy making my dolls have tea parties in his massive office, surrounded by oil paintings of stern-faced Sterling ancestors and shelves lined with leather-bound books about business and finance. Grandfather Theodore had built Sterling Industries from nothing. He'd started with a small manufacturing company in 1962 and turned it into a multinational corporation worth billions. But he'd watched too many wealthy families destroy themselves with entitled children and lazy heirs. He was determined that wouldn't happen to his legacy. When he died 6 months later, everyone expected the company to go to my father, his only son. Instead, the will reading shocked the entire family. Theodore had left everything, the company, the properties, the investments, to me, a 4-year-old girl, through an intricate web of trusts and legal arrangements that wouldn't activate until I turned 25. My parents were furious. They'd been counting on that inheritance to fund their lavish lifestyle. When they realized they'd have to wait 21 years and that I would ultimately control everything, they made a decision that still breaks my heart. They sent me away to boarding school and essentially wrote me out of their lives. I spent my childhood and teenage years in elite schools, visiting my parents maybe twice a year for awkward holiday dinners. They treated me like a distant relative rather than their daughter. Meanwhile, the Sterling Industries Board of Directors, bound by Theodore's will, manage the company with the understanding that they were merely caretakers until I came of age. At 18, I enrolled in business school under my mother's maiden name, Victoria Hayes. I wanted to learn about finance and corporate management without the sterling name opening doors or creating expectations. I graduated summa cum laude with degrees in business administration and finance, then spent 2 years working at competing firms to understand the industry from every angle. When I turned 25, the trusts activated automatically. Suddenly, I owned 60% of Sterling Industries, along with properties worth hundreds of millions and investment portfolios that generated more money in a month than most people saw in a lifetime. The board was legally required to inform me of my inheritance, but I made them sign confidentiality agreements. I wanted to observe the company from the inside before revealing myself. That's when I took a job as a junior accountant at Sterling Industries, using fake credentials and my mother's maiden name. I wanted to see how the company really operated, to understand the people who worked there, to learn whether Theodore's empire was still built on the values he'd instilled. For 6 months, I worked in the accounting department, watching and learning. I saw the office politics, the power struggles, the way ambitious employees schemed for promotions. And then I met Brandon Hayes at the company Christmas party. He was charming, handsome, and completely focused on climbing the corporate ladder. When he asked me out, I was flattered. Here was this successful marketing director interested in a quiet accountant who seemed to have no connections or ambitions beyond her small cubicle. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Brandon was attentive and romantic, taking me to expensive restaurants and weekend getaways that I later realized he couldn't actually afford on his salary. He was living beyond his means, probably hoping to marry someone wealthy or land a promotion that would justify his spending. When he proposed after 8 months of dating, I said yes, because I thought I'd found someone who loved me for who I was, not what I owned. I thought I'd finally found someone who wanted Victoria the person, not Victoria the heiress. Our wedding was small and simple, my choice, though Brandon pushed for something more elaborate. I told him I preferred intimate celebrations, but the truth was, I didn't want the Sterling name appearing in any society pages that might reveal my identity. For 3 years, I played the role of the supportive wife. I managed our household, attended company events as Brandon's +1, and watched him work tirelessly to impress Isabel Crawford, the woman who was unknowingly working for me. The irony was devastating. Brandon spent our entire marriage trying to get close to the power he thought Isabel represented, never knowing that real power slept beside him every night. Now sitting in my car outside Sterling Industries, I touched my stomach where our baby was growing. This child would inherit everything someday, the company, the wealth, the legacy that Theodore Sterling had built. But first, I had to protect that legacy from the man who saw us both as disposable. I sat in my car for 20 minutes after leaving the boardroom, my hands gripping the steering wheel as waves of nausea crashed over me. Whether it was morning sickness or the shock of watching my husband get engaged to another woman, I couldn't tell anymore. Everything felt surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. Working late tonight, don't wait up. Big changes coming. Big changes. He had no idea. I drove home to our penthouse apartment, the one I'd bought with my trust fund money while letting Brandon believe his salary covered the mortgage. Every piece of furniture, every expensive appliance, every luxury he'd grown accustomed to had been paid for with Sterling money. My money. In my home office, I opened my laptop and accessed the secure portal that connected me to my legal team. My fingers trembled as I typed the message that would begin Brandon's destruction. Initiate Protocol 7 immediately. Full asset transfer and corporate restructuring to commence within 24 hours. Within minutes, my phone rang. Victoria? The voice belonged to Harrison Webb, the lawyer who'd been managing my affairs since I turned 25. Are you certain about this? Protocol 7 is irreversible. I'm certain. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. How long will it take? The offshore transfers can begin immediately. The corporate restructuring will take until morning. But Victoria, there's something you need to know about the timing. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Isabel Crawford has been planning this for months. She's been quietly buying up shares from smaller investors, trying to position herself for a hostile takeover. She thinks she can gain control of Sterling Industries by eliminating the board members who oppose her and consolidating power. The room spun around me. How much does she own? 12% as of yesterday. She's been using shell companies to hide the purchases, but our investigators tracked the money trail. Victoria, she's not just after your husband. She's after your company. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. This wasn't just about Brandon's betrayal anymore. Isabel was trying to steal my grandfather's legacy, and she was using my own husband to do it. There's more, Harrison continued. We intercepted communications between Isabel and Brandon. She's been feeding him inside information about company operations, making him think he's earning her trust through his marketing insights. But really, she's been using him to gather intelligence about potential vulnerabilities in our corporate structure. My hands clenched into fists. What kind of intelligence? Employee loyalty assessments, departmental budget allocations, upcoming merger details. Brandon has been unknowingly helping her plan the takeover by providing detailed reports about company operations. He thinks he's impressing her with his business acumen, but he's actually been her spy. The betrayal cut even deeper now. Not only had Brandon been planning to leave me for Isabel, but he'd been helping her steal my company in the process. Every late night, he'd claimed to be working on presentations. Every weekend, he'd spent researching market trends. He'd actually been gathering information to help Isabel destroy everything my grandfather had built. Harrison, I want you to do something else, I said, my voice turning cold. I want you to trace every piece of information Brandon has shared with Isabel. Every document, every conversation, every strategic detail. I want a complete record of his corporate espionage. Victoria, what are you planning? I'm planning to remind them both that you don't steal from a Sterling. After hanging up, I walked to my bedroom and opened the safe hidden behind our wedding photo. Inside were documents that Brandon had never seen. The original Sterling Industries Incorporation papers signed by my grandfather, the trust documents that made me the majority shareholder, and the corporate bylaws that gave me ultimate authority over all company decisions. But there was something else in that safe, something I'd discovered just last week while reviewing my inheritance documents, a clause in my grandfather's will that I'd never fully understood until now. Theodore Sterling hadn't just left me the company. He'd left me a weapon. Buried in the legal language was a provision that allowed me to immediately terminate any employee who engaged in corporate espionage or attempted to undermine company interests. Not just fire them, terminate them with cause, which meant no severance, no benefits, and a permanent mark on their professional record that would make them unemployable in the industry. Brandon had been committing corporate espionage for months, feeding confidential information to someone who was actively trying to destroy Sterling Industries. He'd violated his employment contract, his fiduciary duty, and his oath of loyalty to the company. My company. I pulled out my phone and sent another message to Harrison. Also prepare termination documents for Brandon Hayes, effective immediately. Corporate espionage and breach of fiduciary duty. I want him escorted from the building by security. As I hit send, I felt the baby flutter inside me for the first time. Just a tiny movement, like a butterfly's wing. My hand moved instinctively to my stomach. Don't worry, little one, I whispered. Mommy's going to make sure you inherit a company worth having. Brandon thought he was playing chess, but he'd been playing checkers all along. And I was about to show him what checkmate really looked like. Brandon came home that night at nearly midnight. reeking of champagne and expensive perfume that definitely wasn't mine. He was practically floating, his face flushed with excitement and alcohol as he stumbled through our front door. "Victoria!" he called out, his voice echoing through our penthouse. "Where's my beautiful wife? I have incredible news." I was sitting in the living room, a cup of herbal tea growing cold in my hands. I'd spent the evening watching the first phase of my plan unfold through secure feeds from Harrison's office. The offshore transfers had begun, shell companies were being dissolved, and corporate structures were shifting like tectonic plates beneath Brandon's feet. "I'm here," I said quietly, not bothering to get up from the couch. Brandon burst into the room, his tie loosened and his hair disheveled. "You should have seen it, Victoria. The board meeting, the proposal, everything. Isabel is incredible. She's going to transform Sterling Industries into something amazing, and I'm going to be right there beside her." He collapsed into the armchair across from me, completely oblivious to my expression. "We're going to be so happy, Isabel and I. She understands ambition in a way that—" He trailed off, finally noticing my silence. "Anyway, we need to talk about the divorce. I want this to be as painless as possible for both of us." "Painless," I repeated, my voice flat. "Exactly. Look, I know this might seem sudden, but you have to understand, this is bigger than us. This is about building an empire. Isabel and I, we're going to rule the business world together." I took a sip of my tea, watching him over the rim of my cup. "And what about your current job? How's that going?" Brandon's face lit up even more. "That's the best part. Isabel is promoting me to Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. I'll be her right hand, helping her navigate all the major decisions. She says I have insights into the company that no one else possesses. If only he knew how right she was." "That sounds wonderful," I said. "When does this promotion take effect?" "Monday morning. She's calling another board meeting to announce the new corporate structure. Apparently, there are going to be some major changes in leadership." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Victoria, I'm going to be one of the most powerful men in the industry. Can you imagine?" I could imagine. I could imagine his face when he discovered the truth. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced down to see an update from Harrison. "Phase 1 complete, all assets secured. Phase 2 initiating at 6 a.m. "Who's texting you so late?" Brandon asked, suddenly suspicious. "Just my sister," I lied smoothly. "She's having trouble sleeping." Brandon nodded, already losing interest. He was too wrapped up in his own fantasy to pay attention to anything else. "I should probably get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. I need to start preparing for my new role." He stood up and headed toward the bedroom, then paused at the doorway. "Oh, and Victoria, I'll need you to pack up my things this weekend. Isabel has a beautiful penthouse downtown, and I'll be moving in with her after the divorce is finalized." After he left the room, I sat alone in the darkness, my hand resting on my stomach. The baby was quiet now, but I could feel its presence like a warm secret. In a few months, I would be a mother. My child would grow up knowing that their mother had protected their inheritance from a father who would have sold it for his own ambition. My phone rang softly. Harrison's name appeared on the screen. "It's done," he said without preamble. "The transfers are complete. As of midnight, you now control 97% of Sterling Industries through various holding companies. Isabel's shares have been diluted to less than 2%, and her shell companies have been dissolved. What about Brandon's access? His corporate accounts will be frozen at 6 a.m., his keycard will be deactivated, his computer access will be revoked, and his company credit cards will be canceled. Security has been briefed to escort him from the building if he attempts to enter." I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. And the evidence of his espionage? Compiled and ready for legal action. Victoria, what he's done. It's not just betrayal. It's criminal. Corporate espionage carries serious penalties. I know, I whispered, but I want him to understand what he's lost before we destroy him completely. Through the bedroom door, I could hear Brandon humming in the shower, probably planning his glorious future with Isabel. He had no idea that his world was about to collapse around him. In 12 hours, he would discover that the empire he thought he was joining had just slipped through his fingers like sand. And the woman he'd dismissed as a placeholder was the one holding all the power. Monday morning arrived like a death sentence. I woke up before dawn, my stomach churning with a mixture of morning sickness and anticipation. Brandon was still sleeping beside me, one arm thrown carelessly across the pillow, completely peaceful in his ignorance. I studied his face in the dim light filtering through our bedroom curtains. This was the man I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. The man who'd held me when I cried about my distant parents, who'd promised to build a family with me, who'd whispered that he'd never leave me alone the way everyone else had. The man who was carrying our baby and didn't even know it. My phone buzzed with a message from Harrison. It's time. I slipped out of bed quietly and got dressed, choosing a simple black dress that hid my barely there bump. As I applied my makeup, I caught sight of our wedding photo on the dresser. We looked so happy, so hopeful. I'd believed every promise he'd made that day. Brandon stirred as I was leaving the bedroom. "Where are you going so early?" he mumbled, not even opening his eyes. "Doctor's appointment," I said softly. It wasn't entirely a lie. I had my first prenatal appointment scheduled for next week. Don't forget to pack my things today. Isabel wants me moved in by the weekend." Each word was like a knife twisting in my chest. He was planning our divorce while I was carrying his child. He was choosing another woman while our baby's heart was just beginning to beat. I drove to Sterling Industries in silence, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The building looked the same as always, 30 floors of glass and steel reaching toward the sky, my grandfather's name etched in marble above the entrance. But today, everything would change. I took the elevator to the executive floor, using the private access code that only board members knew. The hallway was empty at 7 a.m., but I could see lights on in Isabel's office. She was probably preparing for what she thought would be her coronation. At exactly 8 a.m., I watched through the security cameras as Brandon arrived at the building. He was wearing his best suit again, carrying a leather briefcase I'd given him for his birthday, walking with the confidence of a man who believed he was about to inherit the world. He swiped his keycard at the entrance. Nothing happened. He tried again, confusion flickering across his face. Still nothing. I watched him approach the security desk, saw him gesturing animatedly as he explained who he was. The security guard, following my instructions, politely informed him that his access had been revoked and he would need to wait in the lobby. My phone rang. Brandon's name flashed on the screen. "Victoria, something's wrong," he said, his voice tight with panic. "My keycard isn't working. There must be some kind of mistake." "Maybe you should call Isabel," I suggested, my voice carefully neutral. "I tried. Her assistant says she's in an emergency meeting and can't be disturbed. Victoria, I need you to come down here. Tell them you're my wife, that there's been some kind of error." I closed my eyes, feeling tears threaten to spill over. Even now, even when his world was crumbling, he still saw me as nothing more than a tool to solve his problems. "I can't do that, Brandon." "What do you mean you can't?" "Victoria, this is important. My entire future depends on this job." "I know," I whispered. "That's why I can't help you." There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was different, suspicious, almost afraid. "What's going on? Victoria, what do you know about this?" I hung up without answering. 20 minutes later, I watched through the cameras as Brandon was escorted from the building by security. He was shouting, demanding to speak to someone in charge, insisting there had been a mistake. Other employees stopped to stare as he was led outside, his briefcase clutched uselessly in his hands. My phone buzzed with text after text. "Victoria, call me back now. Something is seriously wrong here. I'm coming home. We need to talk. Answer your phone." I turned off my phone and sat in the empty boardroom, surrounded by portraits of Sterling family members who had built this empire through generations of hard work and sacrifice. My grandfather's portrait hung directly across from me, his stern eyes seeming to watch over everything. "I won't let them destroy what you built, grandfather," I whispered to his image. "I promise." But as I sat there alone, one hand pressed against my stomach where our baby was growing, I couldn't stop the tears from falling. Because despite everything Brandon had done, despite his betrayal and his cruelty, I still loved him. And that made what I had to do next hurt even more. Brandon burst through our apartment door like a man possessed, his face red with fury and desperation. I was sitting at our dining table, the same table where he'd called me a placeholder just 3 days ago, with a stack of documents spread before me. "Victoria!" he shouted, his voice echoing through our home. "What the hell is going on? They threw me out like some common criminal. Security escorted me out in front of everyone." I looked up calmly, my hands folded over the papers. "Hello, Brandon. How was your day?" "Don't you dare act casual with me." He slammed his briefcase down, his eyes wild. "Something is happening at Sterling Industries. My access is revoked, my accounts are frozen, and Isabel won't take my calls. Her assistant says she's reassessing the corporate structure and will be in touch." I nodded slowly. "That sounds about right." "What do you mean that sounds about right?" He stepped closer, his voice rising. "Victoria, I need you to call someone. Anyone who might know what's happening. This is my career we're talking about." "Your career," I repeated softly. "The career you built by stealing confidential information and feeding it to someone who was trying to destroy the company." Brandon froze. "What are you talking about?" I picked up the top document from the stack and held it out to him. "Corporate espionage charges, Brandon. Every email you sent to Isabel, every document you copied, every strategic detail you shared. It's all here." His face went white as he scanned the papers. Where did you get this?" "The same place I got these," I said, spreading out more documents. "Your termination papers, your divorce papers, and this." I held up the final document, watching his eyes widen as he read the letterhead. "Sterling Industries Board of Directors," he read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "Notice of majority shareholder." He looked up at me, confusion and fear warring in his expression. "Victoria, what is this?" "It's the truth, Brandon. The truth you never bothered to learn about the woman you married." I stood up slowly, my hand instinctively moving to my stomach. "My name is Victoria Sterling. Theodore Sterling was my grandfather. I own this company. I've always owned it." The papers slipped from his hands, scattering across our marble floor. "That's impossible. You're a housewife. You don't know anything about business." "I have 2 degrees in business and finance from Harvard," I said quietly. "I worked at 3 different firms before taking a position at Sterling Industries to observe the company from the inside. I've been the majority shareholder since I turned 25. Brandon staggered backward, his face cycling through disbelief, shock, and dawning horror. No, this is some kind of joke. You can't be. You're nobody." "I'm the woman who's been paying for this apartment, Brandon. I'm the woman who's been funding your lifestyle while you plan to leave me for my own employee. I'm the woman who's been watching you try to steal my grandfather's company while you called me a placeholder." "Isabel," he whispered, the pieces finally clicking together. She works for you. She worked for me, past tense. As of this morning, she's been terminated for attempting a hostile takeover. Her shares have been dissolved, her corporate accounts frozen, and she's facing criminal charges for conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. Brandon collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. This can't be happening. This can't be real. I walked over to him, kneeling down so we were at eye level. There's something else you need to know, Brandon. Something I was going to tell you that morning when you called me a placeholder. He looked up, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd fallen in love with. Vulnerable, scared, human. I'm pregnant, I said softly. 8 weeks. I was so excited to tell you. I thought we were going to be a family. The color drained completely from his face. Pregnant? Our baby will inherit everything someday. The company, the properties, the legacy my grandfather built. But they'll grow up knowing their father saw their mother as disposable. Tears slipped down my cheeks. They'll know their father chose ambition over love. Brandon reached for me, his eyes desperate. Victoria, please. I made a mistake. I was stupid. I was greedy. But I love you. I've always loved you. I stood up, stepping away from his outstretched hand. No, Brandon. You loved the idea of me. You loved having a quiet, supportive wife who didn't threaten your ego. You never loved me enough to see who I really was. I can change, he pleaded. We can start over. I'll be better. I promise. You had 3 years to see me, Brandon. 3 years to ask about my dreams, my past, my family. You never did because you weren't interested in the real me. I walked to the window, looking out at the city where my grandfather had built his empire. Your things are packed. Security will escort you out in an hour. The divorce papers are on the table. Sign them. What about the baby? The baby will be fine. They'll have everything they need. And me? What happens to me? I turned back to him one last time. You get to live with the consequences of your choices. You get to explain to future employers why you were terminated for corporate espionage. You get to remember that you had everything. A wife who loved you, a child on the way, a comfortable life, and you threw it all away for a fantasy. As security arrived to escort him out, Brandon looked back at me one final time. I'm sorry, Victoria. I'm so sorry. I know, I whispered, but sorry doesn't change anything. After he left, I sat alone in our apartment, my apartment, with my hand on my stomach. The baby was quiet, but I could feel the promise of life growing inside me. It's just you and me now, little one, I said softly. But that's okay. We're going to be just fine.